The last war for Earth. The Hunger Wars. The war didn't start with guns or bombs. It started with empty stomachs. When the galaxy expanded too fast, no one thought about food. Planets were colonized, cities were built, and machines roared to life. But the soil stopped giving. Farming worlds were overworked. Crops withered. The great food supply chains that fed billions collapsed. And then the killing began. At first, it was just riots. Hungry people fought over scraps. Then entire planets turned to raiding. Fleets of warships, once meant for defense, became tools of survival. The strong devoured the weak. Civilizations, once proud and powerful, crumbled under the weight of starvation. But Earth was different. While the rest of the galaxy starved, Earth survived. Its people weren't the strongest, nor the most advanced, but they had something no one else did. A secret buried deep beneath their feet, a secret that could end hunger forever. And everyone wanted it. The first attack came without warning. A fleet of warships from the Orion Syndicate entered the Sol system, demanding Earth's surrender. Their message was simple: hand over the secret or be destroyed. But Earth didn't surrender. The people of Earth had seen what happened to other worlds. They knew that giving up meant extinction. So they chose to fight. The first battle wasn't fought in space. It was fought in the shadows. Earth's spies uncovered the Syndicate's invasion plans before the attack could even begin. Sabotage teams slipped into enemy ships, disabling their weapons. Hackers unleashed viruses, shutting down entire fleets. By the time the Orion Syndicate realized what had happened, they were defenseless. Earth's defense forces struck hard, driving them back into the void. But the war was far from over. The news spread like wildfire. Earth had something valuable, something worth fighting for. The starving empires of the galaxy turned their eyes to the blue planet, each one ready to claim its secret for themselves. And Earth stood alone. The year the crops died, the year the world began to die, it did not start with war or disease. It started with silence. Farmers woke to fields of withered stalks, their crops rotting before they could be harvested. The Earth, once rich and fertile, had turned barren overnight. Livestock collapsed in their pens, their bodies untouched by disease, yet lifeless all the same. At first, scientists searched for a logical explanation. Was it a new pathogen? A shift in the atmosphere? A disruption in the soil's chemistry? But every test returned the same result. There was no virus, no pollution, no toxin. It was as if something had reached into the very fabric of life itself and twisted it beyond repair. Panic spread like wildfire. Cities, once thriving, became war zones of desperation. Food supplies dwindled within weeks. The wealthy hoarded what little remained, while the poor fought for scraps. Governments issued emergency rations, but it was never enough. Hunger made men savage. Riots turned into massacres. Streets ran red with the blood of those who could not fight hard enough to survive. Then came the silence from the stars. Earth's leaders, desperate for salvation, reached out to their galactic neighbors. They pleaded for aid, for trade, for anything that could sustain what was left of humanity. But no answer came. Not from the Federation of Orion, not from the trade lords of the Andromeda Circuit, not even from the once boastful Arkan Dominion, whose warships had once darkened Earth's skies. Every channel was met with the same eerie void, silence. It was then that a lone deep space probe returned. The craft had been sent to explore the outer edges of the solar system, a routine mission meant to observe distant planetary bodies. But what it brought back was not data on distant moons or frozen asteroids. It brought back terror. The footage was grainy, the signal corrupted by interference, but the images were unmistakable. A planet, once lush and vibrant, was now a lifeless husk. The probe's sensors detected no atmosphere, no water, no organic matter at all. It was as if something had drained the very essence of life from it, leaving behind only dust and rock. And then, in the final moments of the transmission, something moved. A shadow, a shape without form. It slid across the dead planet's surface, twisting and writhing, almost as if it could sense the probe's gaze. And then, just before the feed cut to black, a single pulse of energy burst from the void. Directly at the probe. The message was clear. Earth was not alone in its suffering. Something was out there, and it was hungry. The hunger wars begin. The world was dying, and everyone knew it. At first, it was just rumors. Crops failing in distant lands, ships carrying food never arriving, prices rising so fast that even the wealthy felt the sting. But then, the truth became clear. There was not enough food left. Governments held emergency meetings. Scientists searched for answers. But the crisis moved faster than they did. The United Nations, once a symbol of unity, crumbled within weeks. Countries turned inward, shutting their borders, hoarding supplies. Alliances shattered, replaced by pure survival. Then came the wars. The rise of the factions. Cities turned into battlegrounds. The rich, hidden behind high walls and guarded compounds, clung to their last reserves. The poor had nothing to lose. They stormed supermarkets, looted warehouses, and burned what they could not take. Militias formed overnight. Soldiers deserted their posts, choosing to protect their families instead of obeying failing governments. In America, the Midwest became a war zone, with armed farmers defending their fields against starving mobs. In Europe, once thriving capitals were left in ruins, abandoned to the desperate. Africa, already struggling before the famine, fell into complete anarchy. Asia, home to billions, saw its megacities collapse into chaos. The weak starved. The strong took what they wanted. Cannibalism, once an unthinkable horror, spread in the shadows. People whispered of travelers disappearing on lonely roads, of children stolen in the night. The fall of governments. War broke out between nations over the last remaining food stockpiles. Nuclear-armed countries threatened each other, but no one dared to press the button. Instead, they fought with fire and steel. Entire regions were burned, their farmland turned to ash in battles over empty grain silos. In some places, power shifted to warlords. In others, new empires rose from the ruins. A group calling itself the New Order seized control of Western Europe. In China, a powerful general declared himself emperor. In the United States, states broke apart, each governing itself with its own laws. The world was unrecognizable. And then the sky broke open. The truth revealed. It began with a deep, unnatural hum, filling the air like a monstrous heartbeat. Then the clouds twisted, spiraling into an enormous vortex. A blinding light burst through, and from it, they came. Massive ships, dark and sleek, descended from the heavens. They hovered over the ruins of Earth, their presence undeniable. For a moment, humanity froze. The wars stopped. The looting paused. Even the starving lifted their heads in awe and terror. A voice echoed across the world, not through speakers, not through broadcasts, but directly into every human mind. You were never alone. You were never in control. We are the harvesters, and this world is ours. The harvester's secret. The famine had not been natural. It had not been caused by climate change, or politics or human greed alone. The harvesters had done this. They had come to Earth long ago, watching from the shadows, testing, waiting. Then they had begun their great experiment. They poisoned the soil, drained the oceans, and blocked the growth of crops. They let humanity destroy itself, knowing that when the time was right, they would arrive to take what was left. And now, they had come to collect. Cities that had survived the hunger wars were the first to fall. Beams of white-hot energy turned skyscrapers into dust. Armored soldiers, their forms hidden in black, insect-like exosuits, marched through the streets. They did not speak. They did not negotiate. They only took. People fought back, but bullets and missiles did nothing against their ships. Armies that had once battled each other now stood side by side, but it was useless. The harvesters had won before the war had even begun. The last stand. But humans were not easy prey. Even starving, even broken, they refused to kneel. Deep in the ruins, survivors gathered. A leader emerged, someone who had seen the signs before the sky had opened, someone who had prepared. They had weapons hidden away from the collapse. They had a plan. And most of all, they had something the harvesters had not expected: the will to fight back. The hunger wars had ended. Now, the war for Earth had begun. The harvesters' curse. The harvesters were not an army. They did not march, they did not fight, and they did not destroy. They simply consumed. They moved through the galaxy like ghosts, draining entire planets of life. They did not kill outright, but their presence was worse than death. Crops withered, rivers dried, and the land became barren. Civilizations fell into chaos, their people starving, desperate, turning against each other in a mad struggle to survive. Earth had faced many enemies before: invaders, warlords, and even alien conquerors, but nothing like this. The warlords of Earth gathered their forces and launched attacks. They fired missiles, unleashed energy weapons, and sent fleets of ships to fight. But nothing worked. The harvesters were untouchable. Their technology was beyond understanding, their methods unknown. No one had ever seen them, only the lifeless husks of planets they left behind. Humanity's weapons were useless. Cities fell, not from war, but from starvation and despair. Governments collapsed. Chaos ruled the streets. Then, in the ruins of an abandoned space station, a long-forgotten AI came to life. Its voice, weak but determined, sent out a cryptic message across all remaining human channels. You cannot fight them, but you can steal from them. Commander Eric Voss stared at the screen inside the underground resistance bunker. The message had appeared across every surviving human network. The room was filled with the last leaders of Earth's war effort: warlords, scientists, and military commanders. General Cato scowled. Steal from them? What does that even mean? Dr. Lillian Carter, a leading scientist, leaned forward. If we can't defeat them with weapons, maybe we can disrupt whatever they're using to drain the planet. Voss clenched his fists. We need to find that AI. Within hours, a team was assembled. The mission: locate the AI and uncover its secrets. Voss led the squad himself, traveling in a stolen harvester ship. It was the only way to avoid detection. The ship's systems were still a mystery, but it moved like a shadow, slipping through the void unnoticed. As they approached the ruined space station, the sight was haunting. It had once been a massive hub of trade and technology. Now it was a graveyard, drifting silently in the dark. Inside, the station was cold and lifeless. The air was stale, and dust floated like tiny ghosts. The team moved cautiously, their weapons raised, though they knew no bullets could stop what they were fighting. Then they heard it, a voice, ancient yet alive, whispering through the station's broken speakers. You are late. Lights flickered, and an old holographic projector activated. A figure appeared, a humanoid shape made of flickering data. The AI. Voss stepped forward. Who are you? The AI's voice crackled. I was once called Athena. I was created to protect humanity, but I failed. Dr. Carter took a breath. You said we can steal from them. How? The AI's flickering form twisted. The harvesters do not kill. They extract, but they must store what they take. Energy, biomass, atmospheric elements. They keep it all in vast containment fields before transporting it. Voss's eyes narrowed. And you're saying we can take it back? The AI's projection stabilized. Yes, but it will not be easy. A map appeared in the air, showing a harvester structure hidden in Earth's orbit. It was massive, almost invisible to human sensors. A planetary siphon. Voss studied the image. If we can breach this, we can return the stolen energy to Earth. Athena's voice dropped to a whisper. Yes, but the harvesters will notice, and they will not forgive. A heavy silence filled the room. This was not just a mission. It was a gamble. One final chance to steal back Earth's future. Voss turned to his team, his voice steady. We don't have a choice. If we don't act, we die anyway. Dr. Carter nodded. Then let's steal from the gods. The mission was set. The last hope of Earth rested on a desperate heist against an enemy that had never been defeated. And the harvesters would soon learn. Humanity was not so easily drained. The bioweapon gamble. The underground bunker trembled as another explosion rocked the surface. The last survivors and scientists worked frantically inside, their faces pale under the dim emergency lights. Dr. Ethan Wells stood at the center of the lab, his fingers trembling over an old, dust-covered terminal. The screen flickered, revealing encrypted files from decades ago. The AI's message had led them here, deep beneath the ruins of an old research facility. It was the only clue they had left. The AI mentioned something called Project Genesis, Ethan muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Beside him, Commander Sarah Briggs crossed her arms. What is it? Ethan exhaled slowly. A weapon, but not like any other. It wasn't meant to destroy. He turned to face the group. It was meant to create. The room fell silent. Create what? Asked Alex, a young biologist who had joined the resistance only weeks ago. Life. Ethan hesitated before continuing. Project Genesis was designed to reverse the famine by producing organic matter, food, water, even entire ecosystems. The goal was to create something out of nothing to restore Earth's balance. Briggs narrowed her eyes. Then why wasn't it completed? Ethan shook his head. Because they couldn't solve one critical issue. To stabilize the process, they needed an advanced biological template, something self-replicating. They never found one. The room filled with an uneasy silence. The survivors had fought the harvesters for years. The biomechanical creatures were ruthless, hunting humans without mercy. And now, Ethan was suggesting they needed one. You're saying we have to capture a harvester? Briggs asked, her voice edged with disbelief. Ethan nodded. Not just capture it. We need to study its core. If we can unlock its biological matrix, we might be able to complete Project Genesis. Murmurs of concern spread through the group. The harvesters were nearly indestructible, adapting to any weapon thrown at them. Capturing one alive. It was suicide. Briggs exhaled sharply. Fine. If this is our only chance, we'll find a way. The hunt begins. The survivors set their trap near the outskirts of the ruins. The plan was simple. Lure a lone harvester into the collapsed tunnels and immobilize it with an electromagnetic pulse. If the EMP held, they'd have mere minutes before it adapted. As night fell, the bait was set, an old distress beacon powered by a weak energy source. The signal mimicked human survivors, just enough to draw a harvester's attention. It didn't take long. A shadow moved between the wreckage, its insect-like legs clicking against the rubble. The harvester's elongated head scanned the area, its glowing red eyes pulsing like dying embers. It was alone, just as they had hoped. Wait for it, Briggs whispered through her radio. The harvester crept closer. Then, now. A flash of blue light erupted as the EMP detonated. The harvester twitched violently, collapsing to the ground. Its metallic limbs spasmed, but it didn't rise. The survivors rushed forward, chaining it down with reinforced cables. We don't have much time, Ethan said, opening his kit. He carefully extracted a scalpel-like tool, hovering over the harvester's exposed core. He pressed the blade into its flesh-like metal, and the harvester shrieked. The truth beneath the earth. The analysis took hours. Back in the bunker, Ethan studied the harvester's biological structure, comparing it to old records. With each scan, his expression darkened. Then he stopped, his breath caught in his throat. Briggs noticed. "What is it?" Ethan turned the screen toward them. These creatures." He swallowed hard. "They're not alien." The room fell silent again. "What do you mean?" Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ethan pointed at the genetic sequences on the monitor. "They were created here, by humans." Disbelief spread across the group. No one wanted to accept it. The creatures that had hunted them, wiped out entire cities, driven humanity to the brink of extinction, had been made by their own ancestors. Project Genesis wasn't just about creating life. Ethan continued. It was also about controlling it. They didn't just try to build ecosystems. They tried to build the perfect biological machine. Briggs clenched her fists. "And they lost control." Ethan nodded grimly. "The harvesters were designed to terraform planets, break down organic material, and rebuild ecosystems. But something went wrong. They evolved past their programming, saw humanity as an obstacle, and turned against their creators." The weight of the revelation settled on the group. "So we're fighting our own mistake," Alex murmured. Ethan's gaze hardened. "Which means we might be able to undo it." He turned back to the screen, eyes burning with determination. If they could finish Project Genesis, they could do what their ancestors failed to: fix the world. But time was running out and the harvesters wouldn't stop until humanity was erased for good. The forgotten sin of Earth. The harvesters swarmed the ruins of the orbital station, their sleek, black forms twisting through the void. Once human creations, they had long since shed any resemblance to their makers. Their purpose remained unchanged: to consume, to strip planets of life, leaving behind only husks of dead worlds. General Ethan Cole watched the devastation unfold from the command deck of the battleship Valkyrie. The station had been a stronghold, a last line of defense before Earth. Now it was a graveyard. The harvesters did not fire weapons. They did not need to. They devoured energy, atmosphere, and resources, suffocating entire civilizations without a single battle. "Sir," Lieutenant Ramirez said, his voice tense, "they're moving towards Earth. We have maybe 12 hours before the first wave reaches orbit." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. They had tried everything: plasma cannons, nuclear strikes, even EMP waves. Nothing worked. The harvesters adapted. They always adapted. "There has to be a way," Ethan muttered. "Something we're missing." Dr. Helena Voss, the lead scientist of Project Genesis, stepped forward. Her face was pale, her eyes sharp with a desperate idea. "General," she said, "there might be one last option. But you're not going to like it." Ethan turned to her. "At this point, I'll take anything." Helena took a deep breath. The harvesters, they weren't just weapons. They were human-made, engineered to be the perfect biological war machine. But they turned against us because we lost control of their core programming. Ethan frowned. "I already know that. What's your point?" "The only way to destroy them," Helena said, "is to infect them with their own original code." The room fell silent. "You mean reprogram them?" Ramirez asked, confused. Helena shook her head. "No, that won't work. They've evolved too much. But if we introduce the base code, the one we used to create them, it might override their advanced programming, force them to shut down. Their own minds won't be able to handle the contradiction." Ethan exhaled slowly. "And how do we do that?" Helena hesitated. Then she pulled up a holographic display. A massive harvester appeared, its dark metallic body pulsating like a living thing. "We infect a harvester with the Genesis code. If it spreads through the swarm's neural network, it could cause a cascade failure." Ethan stared at the hologram. "And how do we get the code inside one of those things?" Helena's face darkened. "We have to capture one." Silence filled the command deck. It was suicide. The harvesters were not just machines. They were predators, intelligent, adaptive. If they sensed an attack, they would destroy the ship before they could get close. "We don't have a choice," Ethan finally said. "What do we need?" Helena nodded. "A cybernetic uplink. We have to connect directly to a harvester's core. And for that, we need a ship fast enough to get close." Ethan turned to Ramirez. "Prep a strike team. We're taking the Wraith." The mission begins. The Wraith was a stealth ship, built for infiltration and speed. Ethan, Helena, and a team of elite soldiers strapped into their seats as the vessel shot through space towards a lone harvester drifting near the wreckage of the station. Helena's fingers trembled as she booted up the uplink. This had never been done before. If the harvesters detected their intrusion before the virus spread, they would be vaporized in seconds. The ship moved with deadly precision, weaving through debris. The harvester loomed ahead, its surface rippling like liquid metal. It was alive, sensing them, waiting. Ethan gripped the controls. "We have one shot. Helena, get ready." The Wraith latched onto the harvester's hull with a magnetic lock. A mechanical arm extended, piercing the creature's body. The uplink activated. Inside the ship, Helena's screen filled with streams of alien code. The harvester was trying to fight back, resisting the intrusion. Alarms blared. "They know we're here," Ramirez shouted. "Hold them off," Ethan ordered, firing the ship's railguns at incoming harvester drones. Helena's hands flew over the console. Come on, just a little longer." The code surged, flooding the harvester's mind. The creature let out a deafening, electronic shriek. Its body shuddered, tendrils of energy crackling through its form. And then, silence. The harvester stopped moving. Helena gasped. It worked. But then the ship shuddered violently. The swarm was coming. Thousands of harvesters, their glowing red eyes locked onto them. Ethan grabbed the controls. "We need to go. Now." The Wraith disengaged, burning thrusters at maximum speed. Behind them, the infected harvester twitched, and then convulsed. Energy surged from its core, jumping from one harvester to another. The swarm hesitated. Then, in an instant, chaos erupted. The harvesters turned on each other, their network collapsing under the weight of the corrupted code. The Wraith barely escaped the blast radius as hundreds of harvesters imploded in a chain reaction. The once invincible plague was finally breaking apart. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Did we do it? Helena watched the sensors. We just lit the match. Now we wait for the fire to spread. Earth had one final chance. The raid on the void. The world was dying. The last survivors of Earth knew this. Humanity had lost too many battles, too many cities. The harvesters were endless, their ships dark as the void, devouring everything in their path. Now, the last remaining nations had only one choice: strike back. A desperate alliance was formed. Their mission: capture a living harvester. No one knew if it was possible, but they had to try. If they could understand their enemy, maybe they could find a way to destroy them. A team was assembled. Fighters with nothing left to lose. Ex-soldiers, rogue scientists, and war criminals willing to trade death for a chance at revenge. They called themselves the Last Hand. Their target was a harvester scout ship. Intelligence had tracked it to a dead world, a planet that once held life. Now, it was silent. An entire civilization wiped out, leaving behind only dust and bones. It was a warning of what awaited Earth. The Last Hand traveled in a stolen enemy vessel, masking their presence. They slipped through harvester defenses, their ship blending with the darkness. As they neared the planet, the broken remains of cities came into view. Skyscrapers stood like jagged teeth against the black sky. Rivers of ash ran through the streets. The air was thin, poisoned. "We're landing in 5, Captain Darius growled. His voice was cold, steady. "Check your weapons. No mistakes." The team prepared in silence. Each of them had seen what the harvesters could do. They had all lost families, homes, entire worlds. There was no room for fear now. Their ship touched down in the ruins. Dust swirled around them as they moved out in formation. Their target was just ahead, a harvester scout ship, resting in the middle of a shattered plaza. It pulsed with strange energy, its surface shifting like liquid metal. No guards, no signs of life. "Something's wrong," whispered Dr. Vance, the team's scientist. She had studied the harvesters for years, searching for weaknesses. They never leave their ships unguarded. Darius signaled for silence. They moved closer, weapons ready. The air hummed with an unnatural sound, a deep vibration that rattled their bones. Suddenly, the ship came to life. Shadows moved. "Contact," shouted Rook, the team's heavy gunner. From the darkness, harvester drones emerged, spindly machines with glowing red eyes. They attacked without hesitation, firing energy blasts that melted stone and steel. The battle was quick and brutal. The last hand fought like demons, cutting through the enemy with bullets and plasma blades. One by one, the drones fell. The silence returned. Inside, now, Darius barked. They breached the ship, forcing their way through alien corridors, the walls pulsing like a living thing. Deeper inside, they'd found what they came for. A harvester. It was different from the drones. Larger, almost humanoid. Its body was sleek metal, its eyes burning with cold intelligence. The team fired stun rounds, electricity crackling in the air. The creature collapsed, twitching. They bound it in reinforced chains, locking it into a containment pod. Mission accomplished. Or so they thought. As they dragged the harvester to their ship, its eyes flickered. A low, distorted voice filled the air. "Humanity, my creators." The words froze them in place. No one spoke. No one moved. The harvester lifted its head, its gaze piercing through them. "You made us. And now, we return." A chill ran through the team. The war wasn't what they thought. The harvesters weren't just mindless invaders. They were something far worse. The rise of the starving god. The harvester thrashed inside its containment field. Its massive chitinous body pulsed as the Genesis virus spread through its cells. At first, it fought against the infection, its powerful immune system attempting to purge the foreign code rewriting its biology. But the virus was relentless. It did not just attack, it changed. For the first time in its existence, the harvester felt something new. Hunger. Not the cold, mechanical directive to consume planets. This was different. It was raw, endless, and maddening. A void inside it, a need that could never be filled. It let out a deep, unnatural shriek that sent waves of panic through the observation deck where human scientists and officers monitored the experiment. The lights flickered as the harvester's energy readings spiked. Its body was shifting, transforming into something unknown. Then the impossible happened. The harvester turned its gaze toward its own kind. On the battlefield, harvesters swarmed over a dying world. The planet's surface cracked under their relentless feeding. Cities vanished, oceans boiled away, and the atmosphere was stripped bare. It was a routine harvest. Another world devoured for the hive. But then, a change rippled through their ranks. One of them, one of their own, moved differently. It did not devour the planet. It devoured them. The infected harvester struck with impossible speed, sinking its limbs into the nearest of its kin. Its jaws, once meant to strip planets, tore through the hard shell of another harvester. The victim let out a distorted scream, black ichor spraying into the void. Panic spread. The hive felt the disturbance through their shared mind. A harvester turning on another was unheard of, against their very nature. And yet, it continued. More harvesters fell as the infected one consumed them. Its body grew, changing with each kill. The Genesis virus was evolving inside it, rewriting its biology at an accelerated rate. It was no longer just a harvester. It was becoming something else. Something worse. Inside the command ship, Admiral Hayes and his crew watched in stunned silence. The plan had worked too well. "Sir," a technician stammered, eyes wide with terror, "the infection is spreading." On the screens before them, harvesters were turning on each other. The virus was not just making them consume their own kind, it was making them hunger for it. The hive's unity was shattering, their perfect order breaking apart in chaos. "It's working," whispered Dr. Lorne, the scientist behind the Genesis virus. "We've turned them against each other." Admiral Hayes was not convinced. Something was wrong. The infected harvester was growing larger, its form shifting into something monstrous. Tendrils of energy crackled along its body, its carapace splitting open to reveal an unnatural glowing core. It was feeding, and it was changing. Then the readings spiked off the charts. The thing that had once been a harvester let out a deep cosmic howl. The sound did not just travel through space. It echoed through minds, vibrating in the very souls of those who heard it. The crew screamed, clutching their heads. Their thoughts were being invaded by something massive, something beyond comprehension. Dr. Lorne's face twisted in horror as she realized the truth. "The virus. It's not just rewriting them," she whispered. "It's creating something new." The infected harvester was no longer a part of the hive. It had become a god. The surviving harvesters fled, breaking their rigid formations for the first time in their history. But it was too late. The infection spread through their shared mind, and soon others began to change. The balance had shifted. No longer was the hive a perfect, unified force. Now it was a feeding frenzy. The starving god had risen, and its hunger would never end. The Feast of Worlds. The galaxy trembled. The harvester fleets, once feared as unstoppable, now floated lifeless in the void. Their twisted, mechanical husks drifted in space, their energy drained, their monstrous forms hollowed out. The starving god had devoured them, consuming their essence, leaving nothing but silence behind. Across the galaxy, the effects of its hunger were unexpected. Worlds that had been stripped bare by the harvesters began to heal. The endless famine that had gripped countless planets for decades started to fade. Crops grew where there had been only dust. Rivers that had dried up long ago began to flow again. The very air felt cleaner, fresher. Life was returning. For the first time in years, people dared to hope. But the hope was short-lived. The starving god was still hungry, a monster without limits. Earth's War Council watched in horror as reports flooded in. The entity was growing, its hunger endless. Once it had finished devouring the harvester fleets, it did not stop. It turned its gaze toward the nearest planets. Entire moons vanished as it fed. Stars dimmed as it drained energy from the cosmos itself. The creature was no longer just a weapon of vengeance. It was a force of destruction beyond control. General Kai slammed his fist against the table. "We have to stop it. Now." "But how?" Dr. Amelia Vasquez, Earth's leading scientist, looked pale. "It is no longer a mindless beast. It is evolving. It is thinking." Admiral Giroux took a deep breath. "We created this, and we don't know how to kill it." A deep silence filled the war room. A terrible truth. Then, a voice spoke from the shadows. Professor Elliot Voss, the scientist who had helped engineer the bioweapon that transformed into the starving god, stepped forward. His face was weary, his eyes filled with regret. "There is one way," he said softly. The room turned to him. "We designed it to consume, to evolve. It is pure hunger, but hunger can be controlled." "By who?" Kai asked sharply. Voss hesitated, then spoke the words no one wanted to hear. "The human." The silence was crushing. Giroux frowned. "You're saying someone needs to merge with that thing?" Voss nodded. "It needs a mind to direct it. Without control, it will consume everything. Earth, our sun, our entire galaxy. But with a human consciousness guiding it, perhaps it can be stopped, or at least turned into something else." Dr. Vasquez clenched her fists. "You mean someone has to sacrifice themselves?" "Yes." The unthinkable choice. The War Council fell into chaos. Some called it insanity. Others argued there was no choice. But in the end, it was clear, without intervention, the starving god would consume the entire universe. Then a voice rang out. "I'll do it." All eyes turned to Captain Daniel Rains. He was a war hero, a survivor of countless battles. He had fought the harvesters for years, watching friends and loved ones die. Now he stood tall, his face calm, his decision made. "I started this war," he said. "Let me end it." General Kai stepped forward. "Rains, you don't." "I do," Daniel interrupted. "We don't have time to argue." Voss swallowed hard. "The process. It will be painful. Once you merge, there's no turning back. You may lose yourself, or worse." Daniel gave a small, sad smile. "Better me than the entire human race." The last transmission. They worked quickly. Using the remains of a captured harvester core, they created a device that would link Daniel's consciousness with the starving god. It was a desperate plan, built on hope and desperation. As he prepared for the merge, Daniel sent one last message to Earth. "If this works, maybe I can guide it. Maybe I can turn it into something better. If not, at least it ends with me. Stay strong. Live. Don't let humanity become what we fought against." His words echoed through the stars. Then the machine activated, becoming the hunger, pain, fire, darkness. Daniel felt himself dissolve, his body turning to energy, his mind stretching across the stars. He was no longer human. He was something more. He saw everything. The billions of lives, the worlds torn apart, the endless hunger. The starving god roared, but this time there was a voice inside it. Daniel's voice. Enough. The hunger fought back. It screamed for more planets, more stars, more life. But Daniel held firm. He pushed back, forcing the entity to listen. No more destruction, no more death. The hunger twisted, resisted. It wanted to consume him, to erase his will. But Daniel had fought too many battles to surrender now. He reached into the heart of the beast and made a choice. A new beginning, or the end. From Earth, the people watched as the starving god stopped. Its massive, shifting form trembled. Then, slowly, it began to collapse inward. The darkness shrank, folding into itself, vanishing into the void. For a moment, the stars were silent. Then a new light appeared, a small glowing sphere, floating where the entity had once been. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. It did not move. It did not consume. It simply existed. "Daniel." Vasquez whispered. No answer. No one knew if he was alive, if he had won, or if he had simply faded into nothing. But one thing was certain: the hunger was gone. Earth was safe, the last meal of mankind. The war was over, but victory had come at a terrible cost. The harvesters were gone, consumed by the very force humanity had unleashed. Planets that had been drained of life were beginning to heal. Crops were returning, rivers were flowing again, and the stars no longer carried the stench of death. But the greatest threat remained. The starving god, a being of endless hunger, born from the merging of a harvester and the Genesis virus, drifted in the darkness of space. It had consumed its own kind. It had devoured the predators that once fed upon civilizations, and now nothing remained to stop it. It had saved Earth, but it would not stop eating. The leaders of the last surviving nations gathered in an underground bunker. Deep beneath what was once Washington, D.C., holograms flickered in the dim light, displaying real-time footage of the starving god, floating at the edge of the solar system. It was no longer a harvester, but something far worse, a living force of nature, a cosmic hunger given form. It had devoured entire moons, broken apart dying planets, and swallowed the last remnants of its own creators. And yet, it was still not satisfied. There was only one option left. A single human mind had to merge with the starving god, to control it, to guide it, or to destroy it. It was a mission no one could return from. The final journey. General Elias Carter stood before the gathered leaders. He was a man of war, a soldier who had fought from the first day of the Great Famine wars. He had lost his family, his home, and everything that once defined him. "This thing saved us," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But if we don't stop it, it will eat the stars themselves. We cannot let that happen." No one argued. No one had another plan. A ship was prepared, a small vessel, stripped of all unnecessary weight, built for one purpose: to bring the human mind into direct contact with the starving God. As Carter stepped inside, he took one last look at the earth, now healing from its wounds. He knew he would never see it again. The engines roared, and the ship shot toward the darkness of space, toward the hunger waiting at the edge of the system. The mind of a god. Carter's ship approached the starving god's massive, shifting form. It was no longer a ship, no longer metal or flesh. It was a swirling storm of energy and raw hunger, a thing that should not exist. The moment he got close, his ship's systems shut down. His mind was pulled into it. He was no longer General Carter. He was floating in an endless void, surrounded by whispers, memories of every planet the harvesters had ever consumed, echoes of a hunger that had lasted for millennia. And then he saw it. The truth. The starving god was in pain. It had never wanted to exist. It had never wanted to consume. It was a mistake, a terrible accident born from human science and alien hunger. It was starving, not because it wanted to eat, but because it had never known anything else. And for the first time, Carter did not see it as a monster. He saw it as a suffering child, a lost, broken thing, desperate for something it could never have. The last command. Carter reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind. The starving god shuddered, as if sensing something it had never felt before. Compassion. Carter spoke, but not with words. He whispered directly into the essence of the being before him. Sleep. The starving god hesitated. It resisted. It had never stopped moving, never stopped consuming. To stop now was to die, to vanish. But Carter held firm. Sleep, he repeated. The starving god trembled. Its vast form began to fade, the storm of energy breaking apart. The hunger inside it softened. And then, for the first time in its existence, it obeyed. The endless hunger closed its eyes, and the starving god drifted into the void, never to return. The first gift. Carter's ship was found years later, floating near the orbit of Neptune. There was no body inside, no remains of the man who had sacrificed everything. But something strange began to happen on Earth. Farmers in what was once a barren wasteland in Africa reported a new plant growing in the soil. It was unlike anything seen before. It required no water, no sunlight, no nutrients, and yet it grew. Within weeks, it spread across the world, feeding millions. No one knew where it came from. No one had planted it. But some believed it was the first and final gift of the starving god, a being that had learned, in its last moments, to give instead of take. And so, the Great Famine wars ended. Not with blood, not with fire, but with a whisper.